In North American folklore, Bigfoot, also known as Sasquatch, is a large, hairy, bipedal hominid creature who reportedly dwells in the wilderness and leaves behind large footprints. Strongly associated with the Pacific Northwest, including Oregon, Washington State, and British Columbia, individuals claim to see the creature all across North America. Bigfoot is also one of the more famous examples of cryptozoology. Cryptozoology is a pseudoscience and subculture that aims to prove the existence of entities from the folklore record, such as Bigfoot, as well as other creatures that could be labeled as monsters. Cryptozoologists refer to these entities as cryptids, a term coined by the subculture. In their hunt for these entities, cryptozoologists may sometimes employ devices such as motion-sensitive cameras, night vision, and audio recording equipment. Because it does not follow the scientific method, cryptozoology is considered a pseudoscience by the academic world. It is neither a branch of zoology nor folkloristics. Bigfoot is most often reported as having a red eye shine. Research from 1952 to 1980 suggests that there were 48 reports of glowing or shining eyes involved in alleged Bigfoot encounters. Among the eye shine reports, 24 cases were reported as red, 15 were reported as white, yellow, or unstated, 8 were reported as green, and 1 case was reported as blue. Many animals exhibit eye shine. That is because of a mirror-like membrane called the tapetum lucidum. This membrane behind the retina reflects light back through the eye, allowing the animal to see better in the dark. Most primates do not have this mirror-like membrane. Alleged Bigfoot reports state that the creature emits eye shine, is mostly nocturnal, and can maneuver very quick and stealth-like through the forest at night. Is it possible that the Bigfoot creature's eyes are equipped with this unique membrane? It is generally believed that the Bigfoot creature is an omnivore. There have been several reports by many who have witnessed the creature sustaining itself on a variety of subsistence food, such as tree bark, insects, frogs, fish, roots, leaves, various seasonal berries, nuts, and fruits. Bigfoot obtains most of its animal protein for consumption by hunting within the game trails. The creature keeps watch for prey by often walking through or traveling around the game trails. There are several reports of the Bigfoot creature being a very stealthy yet powerful predator. Stories have been told by witnesses who have seen the Bigfoot creature suddenly appearing out of the forest, grabbing a deer, and running off with it. In some cases, the Bigfoot creature can be seen twisting the head off of a deer to near decapitation. Other accounts of Bigfoot's stealth and power involve the creature snapping off only the legs of their prey, such as wild boar or deer, as to keep the animal alive and immobile until the time of its consumption. The most common Bigfoot encounter in North America involves the creature being seen as it crosses a road. Most witnesses describe the creature making the trek over a 2-lane highway in only 3 steps. Most often, The witnesses state that the creature moved like a ghost, smooth and seamless across the road until it disappeared in the forest. There are many Native American tribes in North America that state, if you ever cross paths with a Bigfoot creature, do not look it in the eyes. Slowly turn around and walk away from the area. Author Wes Bateman states in his 1993 book entitled Knowledge from the Stars that if you ever meet a Bigfoot, do not harm him or her. After loudly speaking the words, have, do, me, kale, done, sock, which translates to, I witness your presence, I am friend. Slowly turn around and leave the area. There are some unorthodox theories stating that Bigfoot has the ability to raise its vibrational energy field and oscillate at a higher frequency, which in return renders the creature invisible to the human eye, similar to how UFOs raise their vibrational energy field and cloak themselves in the infrared spectrum, which is invisible to the human eye, and can only be seen in a few ways, including the use of an infrared filter lens on a camera shooting in night vision mode during the day. If this is true, would this account for why so many Bigfoot investigators in the forest often hear disembodied voices of unrecognizable language or vocabulary, and hear very loud branch snaps, yet see absolutely no sign of life within the thermal imaging scope? Some Bigfoot investigators even claim to have been touched physically by the unseen. It's been said that some Bigfoot creatures can leave a single footprint in the mud without a trackway in either direction. In some Native American stories, Bigfoot has supernatural powers and the ability to turn invisible at will. In Malaysian folklore, the Orang Mawas, or Mawas, is an entity reported to inhabit the jungle of Johor in Malaysia. It is described as being around 10 feet tall, bipedal, and covered in black fur, and has been reported feeding on fish and raiding orchards. There have been many sightings of the creature. The name given to the creature by the local people translates to snaggled-toothed ghost. Recorded claims of the Mawas sightings date back to 1871. There have been many reported sightings since the 1950s, and in 1995 in Johor, large tracks with 4 toes were reported. In November 2005, a much publicized sighting occurred when 3 workers clearing ground for a pond saw a family of Mawas, including 2 adults and a child, walking near the Kinsin River. Later, large humanoid footprints were found, including one 18 inches long. A photograph of a fresh footprint in tar, attributed to the Mawas, was printed in the Malaysian newspapers in January 2006. The Hibigan is the Japanese equivalent of the North American Bigfoot. Sightings have been reported since the 1970s around Mount Hiba in the Hiroshima province. The Hibigan is described as a black creature with white hands and large white feet, standing around 5 feet tall. It has been said to resemble a gorilla. The Hibigan has a large nose, large, deep, glaring eyes, and is covered with bristles. Theories to account for this cryptid range from a gorilla, a wild man, or a creature ravaged by atomic radiation from the nuclear attack on Hiroshima. A sighting from 1972 reports that the creature has a chocolate brown face and is covered with brown hair and is said to have deep, glaring eyes. In 2 reports by a Mr. Sazawa and a Mrs. Harada, it was said that the creature took no hostile action and fled from 4 armed residents who had the intent of hunting the creature. Japanese Boy Scouts claim to have found footprints belonging to the Hibagon creature, measuring 10 inches long and 6 inches wide. The name Mande Barung, which translates to forest man, is an alleged ape-like creature said to inhabit the Meghalaya subtropical forests in the remote Garo Hills of the northwest India mountains. It is thought to be related to the Yeti of Nepal, the Banmanush of Bangladesh, the Yeren of mainland China, and the Bigfoot of the Pacific Northwest. The creatures are described as being up to 10 feet tall with predominantly black hair. They are said to walk upright like a man. Alleged footprints of the creature measure around 19 inches long. The Barmanau is a purported bipedal humanoid primate alleged to inhabit the mountainous regions of western Pakistan. The Barmanau is the Pakistan equivalent to the North American Bigfoot. The term Barmanau is used in several Pakistani languages. The proposed range of the Barmanau creature covers the Chitral and Karakoram ranges between the Pamirs and the Himalaya. This places the Barmanau between the ranges of 2 more famous cryptids, the Almas of Central Asia and the Yeti of the Himalayas. The Barmanau allegedly possesses both human and ape-like characteristics and has the reputation for abducting women and attempting to mate with them. The Barmanau appears in the folklore of the northern regions of Pakistan, and depending upon where the stories come from, it tends to be either described as an ape or a wild man. The first search in Pakistan for the bipedal humanoid was carried out by a Spanish zoologist living in France by the name of Jordi Magrainer from 1987 to 1990. He was murdered in Afghanistan in 2002. Lauren Coleman wrote that he collected more than 50 first-hand sighting accounts. The oldest account of Bigfoot was recorded in the year 986 AD by Leif Erikson and his men. During their first landing in the New World, the Norsemen wrote about man-like beasts that were horribly ugly, hairy, swarthy, and with great black eyes. Among his accounts, Leif told of seeing huge hairy men who towered over him and his men. The huge hairy men, according to Leif, lived in the woods and had a rank odor and a deafening shriek. It should be noted that Leif Erikson and his men describe huge man-like beasts that were loud and foul-smelling and clearly distinct from the native people. Apparently, Leif had several sightings of the huge hairy men before departing the island. They called the creature Shellring. People believe that the creature Shellring is what we know today as Bigfoot. This is the earliest recorded encounter with Bigfoot or Sasquatch. From the year of 1840 emerges a fascinating letter from a missionary named Elkanah Walker. living in the northern Washington state. Of particular interest in the letter, apart from the mention of giants that could well be Bigfoot, there are notations concerning their strength, the size of their feet, stone throwing, and their smell. Many people who have been close to a Bigfoot have noticed a very strong smell associated with the creature. Both Patterson and Gimlin, who made the 1967 Bigfoot footage, noticed this strong smell and think that it was this that caused their horses to act erratically. As for stone throwing, there are several mentions of this in many reported Bigfoot encounters, as well as the famous Ape Canyon incident. Excerpts from the letter concerning superstitions of the Native American tribes state, they believe in the existence of a race of giants which inhabit a certain mountain off to the west of us. This mountain is covered with perpetual snow. They inhabit its top. They may be classed with Goldsmith's nocturnal class, and they cannot see in the daytime. They hunt and do all of their work in the night. They are men-tealers. They come to the people's lodges in the night when the people are asleep. They take them, put them under their skins, and take them to their place of abode without even waking. When they wake in the morning, they are wholly lost, not knowing in what direction their home is. The account that they give of these giants will in some measure correspond with the Bible account of this race of beings. They say their track is about 1.5 feet long. They will carry 2 or 3 beams upon their back at once. They frequently come in the night and steal their salmon from their nets and eat them raw. If the people are awake, they always know when they are coming very near by their strong smell, which is most intolerable. It is not uncommon for them to come in the night and give 3 whistles, and then the stones will begin to hit their houses. The people believe that they are still troubled with their nocturnal visits. We need the prayers of the church at home. I am, my dear sir, yours most truly and submissively, E. Walker, missionary to the Spokane Indians. The Albert Witch is a 4-foot-tall, ape-like bipedal creature covered in reddish-brown hair that was witnessed in the 1800s in the town of Columbia, Pennsylvania. The town of Columbia is in the Pennsylvania Amish country, but the legend of the Alba Witch may date back as far as 500 years to the Susquehannock Indians, who lived alongside the Susquehanna River and were known to draw ape-like creatures on their war shields. This area is home to Chickee's Rock, a popular picnic spot in the 1800s, where the creature's name and reputation may have originated according to Rick Fisher, curator of the National Museum of Mysteries and Research Center in Columbia, Pennsylvania. These creatures, the Albert Witch, would come out of the trees and steal apples from the people who were picnicking there. They would eat the apples and throw the cores back at the people. The name, Albert Witch, is believed to be a variation on apple snitch, based on its fruit-stealing behavior. Sightings of the Albert Witch tapered off in the late 1800s, but picked up again starting in the 1950s with new reports of a man-like creature around Chickee's Rock. One witness is Rick Fisher himself, who claims he saw an Alba Witch on Route 23 while driving towards Marietta, Pennsylvania. Another witness is Chris Vera, who says a boyhood friend was pinned to a tree by an Albawitch. Vera is president of the Columbia Historic Preservation Society. The apple-loving mini Bigfoot, known as the Albawitch, is celebrated every year with the Albawitch Day Festival in Lancaster County, Columbia, Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania has a long history of Bigfoot sightings, so the Albawitch could possibly be a similar species, a Sasquatch child, or a smaller relative. In 1957, William Rowe sworn in before William Clark, a commissioner for oaths in and for the province of Alberta, Canada. William Rowe's sworn affidavit consists of detailed information regarding a Bigfoot encounter he had. The sworn affidavit states he had been working on the highway near Tête Jean Caché for about 2 years. In October 1955, he decided to climb 5 miles up Mica Mountain to an old deserted mine. He came in sight of the mine around 3 o'clock in the afternoon. He had just come out of a patch of low brush into a clearing when he saw what he thought was a grizzly bear in the brush on the other side. He sat down on a rock and watched with his rifle in his hands. He could just see the top of the animal's head and the top of one shoulder. A moment later, it raised up and stepped out into the opening. He then saw that it was not a bear. The creature came across the clearing directly towards him. His first impression was of a huge man, about 6 feet tall, almost 3 feet wide, and probably weighing somewhere near 300 pounds. It was covered from head to foot with dark brown, silver-tipped hair. But as it came closer, he saw by its breasts that it was a female. Its torso was not curved like a female's. Its broad frame was straight from shoulder to hip. Its arms were much thicker than a man's arm and longer, reaching almost to its knees. Its feet were broader proportionately than a man's, about 5 inches wide at the front and tapering to much thinner heels. When it walked, it placed the heel of its foot down first, and he could see the gray-brown skin or hide on the soles of its feet. It came to the edge of the bush he was hiding in, within 20 feet of him, and squatted down on its haunches. Reaching out its hands, it pulled the branches of bushes toward it and stripped the leaves with its teeth. Its lips curled flexibly around the leaves as it ate. He was close enough to see that its teeth were white and even. The shape of this creature's head was higher at the back than at the front. The nose was broad and flat. The lips and chin protruded farther than its nose, but the hair that covered it, leaving bare only the parts of the face around the mouth, nose, and ears, made it resemble an animal as much as a human. None of its hair, even on the back of its head, was longer than an inch, and that on its face was much shorter. Its ears were shaped like a human's ears, but its eyes were small and black like a bear's, and its neck was unhuman, thicker and shorter than any man he has ever seen. Finally, the wild thing must have got his scent, for it looked directly at him through an opening in the brush. A look of amazement crossed its face. It looked so comical at that moment, Rowe had to grin. Still in a crouched position, it backed up 3 or 4 steps, then straightened up to its full height and started to walk rapidly back the way it had come. For a moment, it watched him over its shoulder as it went away, not exactly afraid, but as though it wanted no contact with anything strange. In addition to the information in his sworn statement, William Rowe made the following remarks regarding the Sasquatch in a letter to John Green. The nails were not like a bear's, but short and heavy like a man's fingernails are. Its eyes were not light and large, but small and black like a bear's. You couldn't see any knotted, corded muscles. This animal seemed almost round. It was as deep through as it was wide, and I believe if this animal should have been 7 feet tall, it would have weighed close to 500 pounds. We've got to get away from the idea of comparing it to a human being as we know them. Bigfoot is generally described as an elusive, shy, recluse-like creature. However, there have been reports of Bigfoot-like creatures abducting and fatally attacking humans, especially in the early to late 1800s, when the populations of humans wandering the outskirts of the remote regions of the forest areas were extremely minimal. A human's chance of witnessing a Bigfoot creature over 150 years ago was extremely rare. Most of North America's regions back then were non-populated and undiscovered. On rare occasions when a human did cross paths with a Bigfoot creature, it's possible that the human was perceived as a food source by the Bigfoot, no different than the creature consuming other large mammals such as bear, elk, and deer. As time progressed, populations of humans spread throughout North America. Forest lands were surveyed and eventually constructed upon. It's possible that the Bigfoot creatures stopped looking at humans as a food source and more as a threat, and retreated to even more remote, unpopulated areas of the forests. It's possible that the Bigfoot realized that killing one human would bring about even more humans, which in return would threaten their way of life and ultimately their existence. Witnesses describe the Bigfoot creature's territorial behavior as aggressive, violent, and threatening, much like the gorilla species found in the forests of Central Africa. Many Bigfoot territorial disputes often result in the creature ripping apart tree limbs, pounding on trees, grabbing and swaying very large trees, and throwing various size rocks and tree limbs. The creature also produces very loud, heavy foot stomps, which can be heard and felt on the ground, along with viciously growling and bluff charging. Bigfoot sightings in the state of Maine date back to the mid-1850s and include stories of an Indian devil the local natives call Pamula, who reportedly lived around the Mount Katahdin region of Maine. One such sighting took place in Maine in early October 1886, when a frightened Frenchman arrived in the Elm City, weaving a frightening tale of a 10-foot-tall wild man with 7-foot-long arms and hair growing all over his face and body. The Frenchman's story is that 3 men were camping out in the woods about 100 miles north of Moosehead Lake. 2 of the campers were away from the camp for a week and came back to find the dead body of their companion. When he and the other camper discovered that their friend was dead, they searched out others to form a posse to find his killer. They went for help and, reinforced by a dozen others, searched the woods for the unknown murderer. The stories read, it proved to be a terrible wild man, 10 feet tall with arms 7 feet in length, covered with long brown hair. The party fired several shots at him and finally succeeded in reaching a fatal spot, laying the monster low. Shortly after, a local newspaper's headline for the Friday, October 8th, 1886 story reads, "A New Kind of Game." One of the first widely published accounts of what could be considered a Bigfoot encounter was written by none other than President Theodore Roosevelt in his 1892 book, The Wilderness Hunter. Roosevelt was an avid frontiersman and a hunter who traversed the wild American West. In his travels, Roosevelt was told the story of 2 trappers who had a deadly encounter with an unknown beast which left enormous human foot tracks in its wake in the wild 19th century alpine terrain of the Bitterroot Mountains along the Idaho and Montana border. Roosevelt describes the terrifying encounter of a frontiersman called Ballman, who was allegedly out with a partner at an isolated area of Montana's Wisdom River to engage in some animal trapping. The 2 men made a makeshift camp and went out to set traps. They were surprised to find that during their absence, something apparently had visited their camp and not only had ripped through their backpacks, but also rummaged through their belongings and destroyed their lean-to shelter. The mysterious creature that had ransacked their camp had also left a series of bizarre footprints all around the camp that seemed to be walking upright on 2 feet. The men, not thinking much of the footprints, decided to stay and merely rebuilt the lean-to and fixed up the camp. Later that night, Ballman supposedly was awoken by something crashing through the brush and an oppressive foul stink. Bowman grabbed his rifle and shot out into the night, after which the creature reportedly scampered off. The following morning, they hiked out to look at the few traps they had set the previous evening. They eventually returned to camp towards the evening. On nearing it, they saw heartily to their astonishment that the lean-to shelter had again been torn down. The visitor of the preceding day had returned, and yet again ripped through their backpacks and rummaged through their belongings. The ground was again marked up by its tracks, and upon leaving the camp, the creature had gone along the soft earth by the brook. The footprints were as plain as if on snow, and, after careful scrutiny of the trail, it certainly did seem as if whatever this thing was, it had walked off on 2 legs. The men kept up a roaring fire throughout the night, one or the other sitting on guard most of the time. Around midnight, the creature came down through the forest and stayed there on the hillside for nearly an hour. They could hear the branches crackle as it moved about, and several times it uttered a harsh and unpleasant, long-drawn, sinister-sounding moan. The following morning, the men made preparations to leave, deciding that they have had enough of the strange, unexplained happenings. Ballman volunteered gathering up their traps while his companion went ahead to pack up camp and prepare to leave. Ballman took several hours in gathering and securing all the traps they had set the previous day. When he finally started homewards, he marked with some uneasiness how low the sun was getting. As he hurried toward camp, under the tall trees, the silence and desolation of the forest weighed in on him. At last he came to the edge of the little glade where the camp lay and shouted as he approached it, but got no answer. The campfire had gone out. Near it lay the packs wrapped and arranged. Stepping forward, he again shouted, and as he did so his eyes fell upon the body of his friend, stretched out beside the trunk of a great fallen spruce. Rushing toward it, the horrified trapper found that the body was still warm, but that the neck was broken. The footprints of the unknown beast creature, printed deep in the soft soil, told the whole story. The unfortunate man, having finished his packing, had sat down on the spruce log with his face to the fire and his back to the dense woods to wait for his companion. While waiting, his monstrous assailant, which must have been lurking in the woods, waiting for a chance to catch one of the adventurers unprepared, came silently up from behind, walking with long, noiseless steps and seemingly still on two legs. Evidently unheard, it reached the man and broke his neck by wrenching his head back with its hand and then fled back into the soundless depths of the woods. Ballman abandoned everything but his rifle and struck off at speed down the pass, not halting until he reached the beaver meadows where the hobbled ponies were still grazing. Mounting, he rode onward through the night until beyond reach of pursuit. In May of 1856, reports of a Bigfoot sighting was documented in April on the Upper Red River in Arkansas. According to this version, which appeared in the Wisconsin Patriot on May 10, 1856, the wild man was spotted breaking the ice of a frozen lake. He was covered with hair of a brownish cast and was described as being well muscled. A party of men from Louisiana had gone into the wilderness on horseback to find the creature and decided to try to capture it. One man from this group had gone ahead of his comrades and decided to try to take the monster on his own. So soon as the wild man saw the horse and rider, he rushed frantically toward them, and in an instant dragged the hunter to the ground and tore him in a most dreadful manner, scratching out one of his eyes and biting large pieces out of his shoulder and various parts of his body. The wild man supposedly made off with the injured man's horse. The hunter's friends set off in pursuit, joined by a party of Choctaw Indians that happened to be in the area. The chase led up into the Ouachita Mountains, then covered in snow from a particularly brutal winter where the pursuers failed to capture their elusive prey. The most widely known and publicized case of an attack on humans from an alleged Bigfoot occurred in the summer of 1924, when 5 prospectors were out in the wilds of Mount St. Helens in Skamania County, Washington State. The group was out in the remote wilderness working on a claim in the area of the Lewis River, about 8 miles from Spirit Lake, when they came across their first of many oddities to come. There, embedded in the earth, was a series of footprints reported as looking very human-like, but much more massive, at around 14 inches in length, with very unusual stubby toes. Not long after this, the men began to see a strange creature through the trees during their journey, with a hulking 7-foot-tall gorilla-like figure seen on at least 4 occasions. The creature was described as being covered in long black hair. At one point, one of the prospectors, Marion Smith, fired at it and sent it lumbering off, but far from cowering, it seemed to only make the creature even bolder. On the morning of July 10th, Beck reportedly sighted the creature standing some distance away near the edge of a canyon and decided to try to take a shot at it. He apparently managed to score a direct hit, and the bizarre figure apparently staggered and fell right over the ledge of a canyon, plummeting 400 feet down, presumably to its death. It was perhaps this incident that would be the catalyst for what came next. Later that evening, the men were relaxing at their camp in the cabin that they had built, when they were all of a sudden startled by a pounding on the roof that seemed to shake the whole structure. The prospectors were immediately on alert and grabbed their rifles. In addition to this pounding, the cabin began to be pelted by large rocks, some of which came straight through the windows and roof. According to the news stories at that time, there were dozens of the creatures prowling around outside the cabin, and the victims would later claim that the men had fired wildly out into the night in all directions, and even up through the roof, in a panicking, desperate attempt to drive the menacing creatures off. According to the men, the fight lasted all night as they cowered in their cabin, shooting at the monstrous hairy intruders that were assaulting them from out in the night, which they called mountain devils. It was not until the coming of morning that they were finally able to escape, leaving their cabin, equipment, and potentially very valuable claim behind. As soon as the story was out, the area became widely known as Ape Canyon, and the Native Americans of the area suggested that the men had come across a tribe of 7 to 8 feet tall, hairy wild men with supernatural powers. They were called the Siatic. According to these tribal sources, members of this lost tribe were typically shy and hardly ever seen, but would exact great revenge on anyone who killed one of their own. Not only is this one of the earliest reports of Bigfoot violence, but it is this one report that really got the public interested in the phenomenon of the giant hairy ape man in North America. One of the people who interviewed Beck about his experiences in later years was none other than Roger Patterson, the man who managed to film the most famous Bigfoot footage of all time in October of 1967, and who published the Beck interview in a 1966 book called Do Abominable Snowmen of America Really Exist? In February of 1829, there were reports in several newspapers, such as the February 9th edition of the Statesman and the Connecticut Sentinel, of an apparent attack by a hairy giant at the Okefenokee Swamp in the state of Georgia. 2 men had apparently ventured out into the swamp to explore, bringing along with them a young boy. As they ventured deeper into the swamplands, they found a series of strange footprints measuring 18 inches long by 9 inches wide. They eventually made their way back home after being spooked by the enormous footprints. Some local hunters heard of the tale and then became interested. One of the men who had seen the footprints accompanied the hunters out to the site where he had found them. They did indeed find some evidence of the tracks and apparently followed them deeper into the wilderness for several days. One evening, as the group was in camp, they reportedly had a terrifying experience when some fierce creature charged them from the brush. 5 men and the creature itself would end up dead in the ensuing battle, and the Statesman news report stated, "The next minute he was full in their view, advancing upon them with a terrible and a ferocious look. Our little band of hunters instinctively gathered close in a tight body and presented their rifles. The huge being, looking undaunted, bounded upon his victims, and in the same received the contents of 7 rifles. He did not fall alone, nor until he satisfied his wrath with the death of 5 of the hunters, which he fulfilled by ripping the head from the body. Withering and exhausted, at full length he fell, with his hapless prey beneath his grasp. When the dead beast's carcass was examined, it was found to measure 13 feet tall and was covered with coarse hair, and the frightened men decided to retreat, as they were afraid its death would attract any others in the area. So hasty was their escape that both the mysterious monster and their fallen partners were left where they lay. A more recent account of aggressive Bigfoot behavior involves a somewhat well-known case that happened in the year 2000 in a rural part of Honobia, Oklahoma. The witness, known only as Mike, supposedly bought a farm there with his family. Several months after moving in, strange things began to happen. One evening, Mike claims that they started to hear loud bangs on the front door and on the sides of the house. In the ensuing days, he claimed he had seen a shadowy figure that stood 8 feet tall, lurking about the property. Things got more harrowing when 30 chickens went missing from the chicken coop, and a load of deer meat was stolen from the shed, which had the door completely ripped off. On several occasions, there were unearthly and deafening shrieks heard howling into the forest night. Mike asked his brother, Tim, for help, and the 2 men decided to try and set up a stakeout to shoot the intruder with rifles. After several nights of staying awake in the dark with their rifles held close, a man-like hairy face reportedly appeared through the darkness at the window to look in, growling ferociously. The 2 brothers fired their rifles at it, sending it fleeing. As the two men ran out onto the porch to pursue it, they saw it fall to the ground apparently dead, and three more of the massive ape-like creatures allegedly then materialized from the trees to carry away the carcass. The following evening, the creatures came back for revenge, as the brothers reported having their house assaulted by the beings, which hurled stones, pounded the walls, and violently shook doors and windows, all while growling in anger. The attacks would persist until the family decided to eventually move away. The incident has been commonly called the Siege of Honobia. William Frederick Cody, also known as Buffalo Bill, was an American scout, bison hunter, and showman. During the American Civil War, he served the Union from 1863 to the end of the war in 1865. Later, he served as a civilian scout for the U.S. Army during the Indian Wars, receiving the Medal of Honor in 1872. One of the most well-known figures of the American Old West, Buffalo Bill's legend began to spread when he was only 23. Shortly thereafter, he started performing in shows that displayed cowboy themes and episodes from the frontier and Indian Wars. He founded Buffalo Bill's Wild West in 1883, taking his large company on tours in the United States and beginning in 1887 in Great Britain and continental Europe. What most people don't know is that William F. Cody may have been presented with the remains of a Sasquatch in 1871. In his autobiography, The Life of Honorable William F. Cody, Buffalo Bill recounted the following interesting experience that occurred while he was still acting as a scout for the U.S. Army. While we were in the Sand Hills scouting the Niobrara County, the Pawnee Indians brought into camp some very large bones, one of which the surgeon of the expedition pronounced to be the thigh bone of a human being. The Indians claimed that the bones they had found were those of a person belonging to a race of people who a long time ago lived in this country, that there was once a race of men on the earth whose size was about 3 times that of an ordinary man, and they were so swift and powerful that they could run alongside of a buffalo, and, taking the animal in one arm, could tear off a leg and eat the meat as they walked. Cody continued, "These giants denied the existence of a great spirit, and when they heard the thunder or saw the lightning, they laughed at it, and said that they were greater than either. This so displeased the Great Spirit that he caused a great rainstorm to come, and the water kept rising higher and higher, so that it drove these proud and conceited giants from the low grounds to the hills, and hence to the mountains. But at last, even the mountain tops were submerged, and then those mammoth men were all drowned." After the flood had subsided, the Great Spirit came to the conclusion that he had made man too large and powerful, and that he would therefore correct the mistake by creating a race of men of smaller size and less strength. This is the reason, say the Indians, that modern men are small and not like the giants of old, and they claim that this story is a matter of Indian history, which has been handed down among them from time immemorial. Cody stated, "As we had no wagons with us at the time these large and heavy bones were found, we were obliged to leave them." Bigfoot also appears to have crossed paths with the Pennsylvania Dutch community known as the Amish. It reportedly took place in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. The incident involved a group of Amish people tending to their farm when they were approached by a wild man-like creature. 3 Amish men were working in the fields near Strasburg, Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, when an odd-looking man approached them from the direction of a neighboring farm. The man was yelling and jumping about. The Amish men were alarmed and noticed that this man had arms, legs, and a face that seemed different, more animal than human. He had coarse, dark hair on his limbs and face. As the man-creature approached closer, he was yelling something, but it was not understood by the men. The men ran towards their house. The man-creature was right behind them. One of the Amish men hid inside a dairy barn, and the other 2 immediately went in the house. An elderly Amish woman who had been in the garden came to see what was going on. When the man-creature saw her, it suddenly stopped running, sat down on the grass, and remained quiet while staring at the sky. The men came out of the house, and one of them slowly walked over to the man-creature and attempted to talk to it. The man-creature continued to look at the sky, but started to mumble. The Amish man and woman noticed a horrible smell emitted from the creature, a smell which could only be described as rotting flesh. After several minutes, the creature got to its feet and started to walk towards the dairy barn. As it did, the witness noticed that the creature started to fade away. Eventually, it completely disappeared from view just before it reached the barn. Shocked, the Amish witnesses dropped to their knees, not knowing what they had witnessed. John Albert Bindernagel was a wildlife biologist who sought evidence for Bigfoot since 1963. He published a book in 1998 entitled North America's Great Ape, the Sasquatch. His second book, The Discovery of the Sasquatch, Reconciling Culture, History, and Science in the Discovery Process, was published in 2010. Bindernagel grew up in Ontario, attended the University of Guelph, and received a PhD in biology from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He moved to British Columbia in 1975, largely because the region was a hot spot for Bigfoot sightings. Over the years, he has collected a series of casts of tracks that he believes were created by Bigfoot. He also claimed to have heard the creature near Comox Lake in 1992, comparing its whooping sound to that of a chimpanzee. Bindernagel believed that the Bigfoot phenomenon should receive more attention from serious scientists, but remarked, "The evidence doesn't get scrutinized objectively. We can't bring the evidence to our colleagues because it's perceived as taboo." Bindernagel died on January 17th, 2018, at the age of 76. Grover Krantz was an American anthropologist and cryptozoologist. He was one of a few scientists not only to research Bigfoot, but to also express his belief in the creature's existence. Throughout his professional career, Krantz authored more than 60 academic articles and 10 books on human evolution, and conducted field research in Europe, China, and Java. Outside of Krantz's formal studies in evolutionary anthropology and primatology, his cryptozoological research on Bigfoot drew heavy criticism and accusations of being fringe science from his colleagues, costing him research grants and promotions. Furthermore, his articles on the subject of Bigfoot were rejected by peer-reviewed scholarly journals. He has been described as being the only scientist and lone professional to seriously consider Bigfoot in his time, in a field largely dominated by amateur naturalists. John Green was a Canadian journalist and a leading researcher into the Bigfoot phenomenon. He was a graduate of both the University of British Columbia and Columbia University, and compiled a database of more than 3,000 sightings and track reports of the creature we know as Bigfoot. Green first began investigating Bigfoot sightings and track finds in 1957 after meeting René Dahinden, and the two researchers collaborated in interviewing witnesses and sharing information of alleged sightings. A year later, Green was shown a series of 15-inch tracks crossing a sandbar beside Bluff Creek in California, so deeply impressed as to indicate a weight of many times that of any potential hoaxer. He had been trying ever since to establish what it is that makes the tracks. Green also investigated the original Sasquatch tracks reported in Bluff Creek, California in the summer of 1958. As a renowned authority in the field, Green appeared as a keynote speaker at all three of the major scientific Bigfoot conferences held so far. Green authored several Bigfoot books, including Sasquatch, The Apes Among Us, regarded by the Bigfoot Field Research Organization as the best written book on the subject. It has recently been reissued along with an updated combination of two earlier books, and it is titled The Best of Sasquatch, Bigfoot. René Dahinden was a well-known Bigfoot researcher. René was born in Switzerland but moved to Canada at the end of October 1953, where he would live for the rest of his life. He became interested in the Bigfoot phenomenon shortly after arriving in Canada. During the next few decades, he conducted many field investigations and interviews throughout the Pacific Northwest. Renee was a major advocate for the controversial Patterson-Gimlin film, which was taken in 1967 and supposedly provides photographic evidence of a Bigfoot. He also co-wrote a book entitled Sasquatch with Don Hunter, which was published in 1973 in a hardcover edition. In 1975, the book would be issued as a paperback. This title would then be revised and renamed in 1993 as Sasquatch, Bigfoot, The Search for North America's Incredible Creature. In the 1987 Hollywood movie entitled Harry and the Hendersons, the Sasquatch hunter character, played by actor David Suchet, was based on Renee DeHinden. The majority of Bigfoot encounters that have occurred in North America were reported by witnesses who, prior to the encounter, were non-believers, skeptics, or those who have never took any serious thought of the creature beyond the realm of TV and entertainment. In the wake of a Bigfoot encounter, many questions a witness may have in regards to the experience will become unanswered, especially within society's controlled means of explanation and reason. If it can't be explained with science, it will be shunned. If it shows signs of a human metaphysical nature, religions may call it divine. If it shows signs of an animalistic metaphysical nature, religions will then call it the devil. And if one speaks outward and open about a Bigfoot encounter, most of society's preconditioned reactions will enable them to either smile, laugh at you, or assume you to be of a lower intelligence. The unexpected predicament a Bigfoot witness finds itself in can also be a saving grace that can become the fuel that ignites a spark inside one's being, that ultimately will inflame a desire for knowledge, turning the witness into a seeker of previously unaccepted and unknown truths that are kept hidden within the recesses of the human mind. It has been said that there is around 7 billion people currently living on this planet that we call Earth. And you may live in the city, you may live on the shores, or you just may live inside your mind. Whatever the case may be, just remember this. One day you might find yourself in or near the forest, and when that day comes, keep your eyes, your ears, and your mind wide open, because sooner or later, in one way or another, Bigfoot will eventually make its presence known in the forest. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the In the Forest YouTube channel and never miss a new episode.